Buongiorno everybody, and hello again from the beautiful city of Rome. This is my last full day here in Italy, and I'm having a little bit of separation anxiety already. I would love to stay. Unfortunately, the first day of school is on Monday, so I need to go home and set my kids up. But I decided to go out to see the Vatican because that was the request I got the most from all of you, to see what the situation at St. Peter's was like. So I'm out here and we'll see what happens. Here's how I got here. I took one of these wonderful electric bicycles, which honestly, I'd have never done that on a normal day. But if you look and see, look at how there's zero traffic. There are no people anywhere around here. And because of that, I thought, well, what the hey, I can ride a bike on an empty street. So it was actually a lot of fun, but on the other hand, it was also very bumpy. I should have worn a sports bra. But I'll be picking that bike up once I'm done walking you around St. Peter's a little bit. And then we'll see where else I end up exploring. I'll be joined later today by my friend Susanna Peduchini. I don't know what we're going to do, but we will do something fun for you on this last full glorious day in Rome. So here's St. Peter's. And you can see down to the river. There are, poca gente. Few people here and there. So I thought I would just go up here and investigate what the situation is with tourism, if there's a lot of people and lines, and I'm just really curious. So St. Peter's is the main church of the Catholic Church, but there's something you may not know about it. This is actually not the official church of the Catholic Church. The official church of the Pope, his seat is not here. His seat, he's the Bishop of Rome. That's his official title. And the Bishop of Rome's seat is not here. The Bishop of Rome's seat is at San Giovanni in Laterano, which is a much older church on the outskirts of Rome, kind of closer to the train station. So this is the home church and the Vatican City, which is sort of the defensive zone of the papacy. So this church was built on the site of an earlier church. The earlier church was built during the time of Constantine in the 300s, and it was built on top of what they thought, and actually turns out probably to be, was the grave of St. Peter. This church you see now was built in the late Renaissance, so late 1500s through the end of the 1600s by Michelangelo and Bernini and many other famous architects. So, do a little panning shot here for you. These buildings are quite interesting. I've talked about fascist architecture with you guys before, and fascist architecture is kind of fascinating because it was something designed to show the might of the fascist government, but done in a way that sort of harmonizes with existing Italian style. So you don't have to like it, but I want you to understand, when you look at this, they're using the same materials that ancient Roman buildings used, travertine and that thin brick, the Roman style brick. And the scale is the same as a Baroque palace, for example. So they really tried to kind of modernize, but use the language, the architectural language of ancient Rome. So I think they're fantastic. These buildings were all built because this street here did not exist in the past. This street was built by Mussolini, and you have to imagine that this whole neighborhood, all through here, there was an ancient neighborhood, the Borgo. And the Borgo still exists, but this particular part of it was destroyed because Mussolini wanted a grand parade route. So let's go and investigate what's going on over here. Here is a wall. This is kind of an interesting thing. So if I go back a little bit, let me just step back for a history lesson. The Pope functioned, as I mentioned yesterday, like a king. The Pope was not necessarily the spiritual figure that you think of in the distant past. He functioned very much like a noble, like a duke. And at the time, let's go back to the year, 1300. Italy was never a country. It was not a country until the 1800s. And in the past, it was all these different little city-states. So Rome and the papal was the papal states. So the Pope was a king or a duke of his own territory. Okay, so because of that, Umbria, Lazio, this whole region here was all considered the papal states. And the Pope was the head of all of that. So when you think about that, it'll make a lot more sense to you why, when you come to the Vatican City, it looks defensive. It's because the Pope was attacked. The Pope was attacked by all kinds of different rivals at the time who wanted his land. The city was sacked by the Germans, actually, who in theory were supposed to be protecting him. But over and over again over time, the Pope was under attack by a lot of different forces. So you can't think of him strictly as a religious figure in the past. He was a political figure throughout the ages. And as I mentioned yesterday, the great families of Rome all competed to have a pope in their family, because if they had a pope in their family, they could do what they wanted to the city of Rome. They could build whatever they want. They could use the Vatican treasury to enrich themselves. So it was really a politically savvy thing to do, to try and have a pope in your family. So that's why when we look at the facade of this church, you're going to see in large script a dedication to Paul Borghese. He was one of the popes from the Borghese family. He was not the one who commissioned St. Peter's. Actually, it was Julius II, who is famous for the Sistine Chapel. But he just happened to be there when they wanted to sign the exterior. So he put his name on the exterior. So this is what it's all about. It's product positioning. It's branding. All of these famous families need to make you know that they had a pope. When you look at these crests here, which if you've been to Rome, you've seen everywhere. These crests are the symbols of the families. The Pope's hat and the cross keys, that's always the same because it tells you that was a Pope. But underneath, the shield is different. And that's their label. That's their Nike swoosh or their McDonald's golden M. You know, they want to make sure that you know who paid for what. So all of this is to say that you need to think about this stuff in a slightly different way. And I think if you're Protestant, you may already do that. I'm Catholic, so I like to think of it in a slightly more positive way, I guess. But this is all about politics. So the Vatican is politics. It's not simply religion. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to take you through the gates, and I'll tell you a little bit about the square itself. It's very funny when people offer me tours of the Vatican. Because what do you say? I've been a tour guide for 20 years, so yeah, no thanks. Okay, so here we go into the square. The great clock is bonging. It's time to, what is it? It's after 1 o'clock, I think. So this is the main square, Piazza San Pietro, and the thing that you need to imagine, so just let's get into our time machine and use our imaginations, is that this zone did not exist until the 1940s. So in the past, this whole area would have been a knot of ancient streets. And as a pilgrim, as somebody visiting St. Peter's for the first time, if you cross the river, there would never have been this grand promenade here that you see. Instead, it would have been a whole bunch of little tiny alleys. So by the time you got to this street here and you crossed into the piazza, seeing this incredibly large space pop up before your eyes was intended to be theatrical. It was intended to be something that was a surprise. And if you look, these colonnades, they're called the Brachio, or the arms. They're made to look like arms for a reason, because it's sort of an embrace. As soon as you found your way here, maybe you came on foot from France, maybe you came on foot from Spain. And when you enter into St. Peter's Square for the first time, you want to be embraced. And so that's the architectural expression here. And that was the design of Gian Lorenzo Bernini, who is one of the most famous architects of the 1600s, the Baroque period. He's not Renaissance, he's Baroque. If he ain't Baroque, don't fix him, you know. And he came up with a lot of architectural tricks and illusions to make this space feel grand and magical. So I thought I'd take you over here. And I want to show you, yeah, I mean, you guys are commenting about how quiet it is. I know. Like the line just to get into the church, I have never, even at 6 a.m. in the morning, seen it so short. So I will definitely be taking you in. I don't know if I'll be able to talk in the church, but I'll at least take you for a stroll through. So this square has some fun architectural games to it. First of all, the obelisk. I don't know if you know about obelisks. The obelisks were something from Egypt, actually. And when I was in Egypt this year, I learned a lot about obelisks because they were devotional objects to the sun god Ra. Unfortunately, when the Romans came and subjugated Egypt, they liked them. So they put them on their boats in ancient Roman times, and they brought them here. I think there's 13 of them here, and there's far fewer in Egypt. I think there's only maybe 4 or 5. There's one in Manhattan, there's one in London, but in Egypt itself, they have very few. So Rome has the largest concentration of these objects, these obelisks. So of course, the Romans and then later on the Vatican, they don't worship the sun god Ra, but they decided to use these and recycle them, and then put at the very top, you can see, there, you can see that they always put a cross, and then they usually put something that they can put a piece of the true cross in, for example. So it's a way of recycling a religious object into a new one. I find it kind of bizarre, sacred and profane, of course, but è così, this is the way Rome is. You have to accept that this is a mixture between the sacred and the profane, the historical, the fantastical, the religious. It all weaves together, and you can't really judge it because the history is so complicated. So it's all at once. Everything is all at once here. So this main obelisk, though, here, they say, was here in the center of the Circus of Nero. The Circus of Nero was actually here before. That was the thing that was here before the Vatican existed. And they say that this is where Nero liked to dip Christians in oil and use them as torches for his games. So this area was always considered to be a symbol of the cruelty of the Romans against the Christians. Also, it was outside of town. This side of the river in ancient Roman times was prati, was fields. And in fact, this neighborhood outside of the Borgo is called prati because it had nothing in it until the 19th century. So this was outside of town. And so when the popes decided they wanted to expand their territory, they wanted to have a larger home, a larger palace, what they decided to do was to come to the place they could expand, that they had room. Nero's circus was over, but they still had a large space here, and this roughly, in this piazza, kind of is about the size of that. And then the Vatican Hill, which is a hill, they were able to fortify and turn it into a fortified church and palace. And then finding an old graveyard, because of course Romans were buried usually along roads exiting the city of Rome. They found an old graveyard where they found a tomb that they believed to be St. Peter. And because of that, that's why they built a church here. The original one in 330 was about the size of Santa Maria in Trastevere that I showed you last night. And then in the time of Julius II, which is the 1500s, he's the pope that forced Michelangelo to paint the Sistine Chapel. Julius II then commissioned this church and wanted to tear down the old one. The funny thing is, though, that the little church, it was much smaller. They built this church around it. And the story goes that as soon as they were able to make enough of the walls of the new church, they dismantled the old church and took it out through the front door of the new church. So that perhaps gives you a sense of the scale. The scale here is always insane. So just kind of consider the scale as we walk around. So here's a little trick I wanted to show you that I think is just delightful. Baroque architects are always trying to play with you a little bit, right? So they love to play visual tricks. So here's one of their best visual tricks. There's a stone in the ground, and it's the focal point of all of the columns. You see it says Centro del Collinato. So if I stand here, all of a sudden, all of the columns align. Do you see that? So they all align. So it's just basically a fun visual trick. And that's what the Baroque architects love to do, was fun visual tricks. So today, they do have the water going. They have the water in the fountains going. Oh, another fun visual trick, that I wanted to point out. When they move this column here, or the obelisk here, do you see how at the very bottom, there are these lions that the obelisk is sitting on? That obelisk weighs a ton, but they wanted to lift it up just a little bit from the pedestal because that gives you the sensation that it's light. So it's yet again another one of these tricks that they love to play. So let's go ahead and look at the facade of the church. I'll tell you a little bit about that, and then we'll take a wee break while I get through security and get into the church and see if I can talk to you there. Oh, the free water in Rome is so wonderful. It's so refreshing. It's some of the best quality water that you'll find anywhere. Actually, I'm going to take a little sip if you don't mind. It's a little toasty today. So, let's see how it is. Yeah, very refreshing. All right, so let's go ahead and we'll look at the facade. Normally right now this would be impossible to walk through on any other day of the year because they usually have the Piazza set up for the papal audience. But of course with COVID they have stopped doing the audience in the way they have been. I did hear they did do an audience this week, but a much smaller one in a different location. So typically up on the top of the steps would be the dais where you'd have the papal lawn chair basically where the Pope would sit for his audiences. So up here, that little building up there is the Papal Apartments where the Pope should live, although this Pope does not live there. That's his official residence, and you can see the yellow shades there. That marks the Papal apartment that most popes have lived in, but that's also where the Pope comes out on certain days, on Sunday, for example, to do the Angelus and to say hello to the admirers in the square. But the church itself, the facade, is travertine, which we've already talked about. So essentially this is made out of the same material as the Colosseum. And in fact, it is made of the Colosseum. They recycled parts of the Colosseum walls that fell down in an earthquake and created this church out of this. So much of what you'll see inside is actually recycled from a different time. The terrace up above and the dome, you can actually go up onto the terrace and into the dome. The dome was designed by Michelangelo, but the facade was not. The original facade was designed by Michelangelo, but they decided that facade made the church too short. The original church was a Greek cross, which is, a plus sign. They decided after getting mostly through the project that the church just wasn't big enough. So they extended the facade out. They tore down the Michelangelo facade, made it into a Latin cross, which is more like a T, so like this up to this, and then they had to design a new facade, which then was by that point, a different architectural style, which is Baroque. So that's why what you see behind me is not what Michelangelo would have chosen. He was long dead. He had perished long before, but the dome is the thing that we can see that he designed. By the way, Michelangelo would have never wanted you to remember him as a painter. He was foremost a sculptor and secondarily an architect, but he thought that painting was a very low-level art form. So ironic, of course, that that's what we remember him for. So if you look at the letters there, just to give you a sense of scale, those letters up there are the same size as me, and I am not small. I am 6'2". So imagine me standing up there on the facade where those letters are, and I think that helps to give you a better sense of scale of what you might actually see up there. So, va bene, it's a little hot, so I'm going to proceed a little bit into the shade here. It's incredible to me to see this so empty. We have up there two different saints. If you can see the statues, there's one here. That man is holding keys, and because he's holding keys, I know he is Saint Peter. And this man over here is holding a sword, and because of that, I know that that's St. Paul. St. Paul was beheaded, martyred by having his head chopped off with a sword, so he carries the symbol. We don't know what he looked like, of course, but we know how he died. And so in art, you can always recognize saints by the things that they carry with them. So he is definitely St. Paul, and St. Peter over there holding the keys because he has the keys to the kingdom of heaven. So that's what he's always shown with. He also has curly hair, and apparently he had curly hair. So it's kind of an interesting thing. Small details about Peter in particular persist. So we know at least a little bit about what he might have looked like. So when we go inside, we'll see the dome, hopefully, if I can take you in there. Inside the dome, there's a pun. It says, "Peter, you are the rock upon which my church is built." It says this in Latin. But Peter was never his name. His name was Simon. His name was changed to Peter because Peter is pietra, which is stone. So they changed his name to reflect his role in the church, which is that he was the foundation, the first pope. He's the first pope. Maybe you knew that, but that's a little factoid that escapes a lot of people. They didn't know that Peter was the very first pope. So Over here we've got, behind these columns, one of the major entrances into the Vatican, the Porta Sant'Anna, I think, and there's usually Swiss guards over there. So I think what I'm going to do is I am going to pause our broadcast for a few minutes. I'm going to try to get through security. So if you want to take a little coffee break, I know it's morning for all of you, go make yourselves a cappuccino, and then you can rejoin me in a few minutes inside, and I'll see if I can talk to you. I'll try to whisper a little bit to you if I can and show you the interior of St. Peter's on our little mosey through Rome without tourists. You know, it's beautiful and it's interesting and I'm loving it, but at the same time, I was chatting with some Roman friends last night, and I think we all agree that there's a certain level of sadness to it. I thought it would be super cool to be here with no tourists. It's like Disneyland without any lines, you know? But there's something about Rome that the energy of it has changed without the international community, because this has always been an international city. You know, it's always been a city whose energy comes from the travelers who are here to visit it. So it's a little strange, but you know, it is what it is, and I'm here happy to witness it, and I'm happy to be here to document it for you. So in the comments, please put any questions you might have for me. I'm happy to chat back with you if you've got some thoughts or comments about St. Peter's or Catholic Rome. And today I'll try to do a few different clips. I'll finish with the interior of St. Peter's, and then we'll see where the day takes me. So if you have some suggestions, I'm happy to take those, okay? So go make your coffee, and I'll see you back here as soon as I get through security, okay? Ciao, ciao.